want to give all praises and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rechak Wadash. I want to give double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, because those are the men who I learned the truth from through the spirit of power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai. Yahweh is the true name of the God of Israel. Yahushai is who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, but his one and only true name is Yahushai. And pretty much in this lesson, I'm going to be revealing the mystery of the Gentiles in the New Testament being Israelite foreigners, because a lot of you don't watch the older lessons that the apostles of Great Millstone have done in the past. You don't know the channels really to learn the proper breakdowns, because a lot of times we be focused on prophecy, which everything is prophetic. When something comes to pass with a date and time, secular history is prophecy that came to pass. All right, but it's nice to read the chapters and get basic understanding of the scriptures. Now, the word Gentile, from the Latin word gentilis, as we all learned from Apostle Gabar, is that the word Gentile from the Latin word gentilis, it means foreigner. So when you read Galatians, the 2nd chapter, Paul uses words like brethren, us, saints, church, dearly beloved. Why does he use specific words like that? Because he's talking to Israelites in his letters. He's addressing Israelites in his letters, all right? So you have Christians, they like to misinterpret that the Gentiles in the New Testament that believe and that can be saved is referring to the 17 heathen nations, and it's not. It's referring to Israelite foreigners, because when you read Galatians, the 2nd chapter, that's who Paul was sent unto as a chosen vessel to preach the gospel, aka the correct doctrine, to the Israelite foreigners. And the ones pursuant to Ephesians, the 1st chapter, that's predestinated to be a part of the elect, they will receive the gospel. All right? So let's get into it. So we need to figure out, how come in the New Testament the Israelites was looked at as Gentiles, right? Because you had Israelites that were raised up in our culture, our way of life, which is the law, statutes, and commandments, raised up as Jews in Judea. And then you had the foreigners that was outside of the land of Israel, but on the outward appearance as well as customs and philosophies they believed on, they were looked at as Gentiles. Especially, they were uncircumcised as well. So the Jews, they looked at the Israelite foreigners, although they come from the same seed line and nation, as actual Gentiles. 1 Corinthians 12:1. The point is in 2. It says, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I will not have you ignorant. Now, when you read Apostle Paul's epistles, in which these Edomite scholars, they call it the Pauline epistles, right? When you read his epistles, he uses words like brethren. Let's go into the word brethren in the Greek.
Strong's G80, Adelphos.
Adelphos, right? A brother, whether born of the same two parents or only of the same father or mother, right? Having the same national ancestor. Now, who is Paul addressing in the book of Corinthians? Israelites in Corinth, Greece. That's why he's using specific words like brethren, because what would the Israelite foreigners that's being called Gentiles, how would they have the same national ancestor if they come from a different seed line, meaning a different nation? So the people that Paul is addressing in his letters is the same seed line as him, or nation, that have the same national ancestor, which would be who? The fathers of the promise, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's that simple. Belonging to the same people or countrymen. Paul is addressing his people. It says, so that's the point, all right? If you're saying brethren, you're addressing people that's related to you. by nationality, and nations are established through the seed of a man. All right, the word seed, going back to the Greek word sperma, it means seed. Nationalities, nations are established through the seed of men and named after men. All right, Paul is talking to Israelites. When you read the book of 1st or 2nd Corinthians, he is addressing Israelites in Corinth, Greece. If it says Rome, he's addressing the Israelites in Rome. If it says Colossae or Colossians, he's addressing Israelites in Colossae. All right, Ephesus, Ephesians, so forth and so on. He's talking to Israelites. Now here's the point, verse 2, it says, ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led. So they were looked at as Gentiles, referring to the Israelite foreigners, because of what? The idols they were worshiping. All right, the customs, the philosophies they believed on, following the way of the heathen. Which when you read throughout all the scriptures, the Israelites is commanded not to follow the way of the heathen, not to keep the ordinances of Egypt. That's why when you read Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, the Most High Yahweh, he gave the Israelites the laws, statutes, and commandments to separate and elevate us above the heathen nations. All right? So if these were actual Gentiles that can be saved when you read the New Testament, how come it says ye know that ye were Gentiles? That would be impossible, because you can't change your nationality. You can't change your seed line. All right? Let's go into the word Gentiles. The word is ethnos, the same Greek word that's used in Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, which when you read Revelation 7 and 4, is letting you know that verse 9 and 10 is referring to Israelites. So the Greek word is ethnos, right, for the word Gentiles. And here's the point. A multitude of individuals, meaning the Israelite foreigners, of the same nature or genus, right, meaning that they're the same. By what? Seed line, nationality. The human family, singular, is referring to Israelites. How do we know that? Because when you read verse 1, it has the word brethren there. A tribe, nation, people, group, singular. Paul is only addressing the Israelites in his epistles to not follow the way of the heathen. As their faith increases, they're going to rehearse, meaning keep the laws, statutes, and commandments more and more to the best of their abilities through grace, through Yahweh's blood of sacrifice. Paul uses the term for Gentile Christians. You already know where I'm going at with this. When you read Acts the 6th and the 11th chapter, as well as Acts 13, who were the Christians? They were Jews that followed the Messiah. And the word Christian, it was a derogatory term. Oh, look at them Christians over there, right? Because back during that time, you had a lot of individuals that didn't accept Yahushua. They didn't accept the gospel. They didn't accept that Yahushua was the Son of Man, the Messiah prophesied to come and die for their sins. They didn't have faith. Why? Because it was a gift. They wasn't predestinated to have faith. All right? So the big discrepancy that wicked Israelites had during the time of Yahushua is that they elevated, or they put the law, statutes, and commandments, as well as our forefathers like Abraham and Moses, above Yahushua. That's why when you read Matthew the 17th chapter concerning the transfiguration, what was the point of the transfiguration? To show you that Yahushua, he was illuminated and he was above the law and the prophets. And Yahushua, he kept the law, statutes, and commandments perfectly. Something that no Israelite on the planet Earth ever did. All right? So the Gentile Christians were Israelite foreigners that followed the Messiah. So that's simple, man. So there you go. So when they repented, aka became a proselyte, like how when you read in Acts the 2nd chapter, a proselyte is what? A new believer or a newcomer that repents, all right? That goes back to listening or believing the law, statutes, and commandments and having faith upon Yahushua, all right? Converting from one religion, which will be the way of the heathen, all their different customs and philosophies, back to the law, statutes, and commandments. So that's why Paul is saying this, 1 Corinthians 12 and 2, ye know that ye were Gentiles. You can't change your nationality, all right? They were Gentiles, meaning what? They had that Gentile pagan mindset. It's that simple. Carried away unto these dumb idols, even if you were led. The NLT version says what? It says, 1 Corinthians 12 and 2, ye know that when ye were still pagans, all right, ye were led astray and swept along in worshiping speechless idols. There you go. Speechless idols that can't do nothing for you. So we're going to keep that open. Now let's start to get into some of this. So I typed in Hellenized Israelites being called Gentiles New Testament, because you people need to understand that the Israelites that could be saved, and that's being called Gentiles or Grecians, Greek-speaking Jews, they were Israelites. But what happened was there's a history before ancient Rome that you need to know so that you can understand the New Testament that's taking place during the first beast, which is ancient Rome. All right, the Israelites, they was Hellenized by the time the ancient Roman Empire came about. So, AI overview. In the New Testament, right, and now they go off. When you're reading this AI overview and when you're using information offline to do your lessons, you have to vet information and you have to be very specific in what you're bringing out, because you don't want to cause confusion, right? So it says in the New Testament, I'm going to skip all that first part. It says, but the term often mass, because that's the thing they don't want you to know. They don't want to let you know that when you read from the Old to the New Testament, salvation is strictly only for the seed line of Israel. More importantly, the elect of the nation of Israel that's predestinated unto salvation through YAHSHAWAR. The world doesn't want to let you know that. So people are under the veil, right, of what? Roman Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church, the different Christian denominations, all these false man-made religions, right? So this is what they are hiding, and this is the truth that Great Millstone through YAHSHAWAR is teaching. It says, but the term often mass Hellenized Israelites dispersed northern kingdom. So you had Israelites that were dispersed. Like when you read in Luke the 2nd chapter, it mentions an Israelite woman from the tribe of ASSHUR, because you had the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Not all of them went to Assyria, not all of them went to ASHUR, which is the Americas, all right? You had a small number of northern kingdom, known as the kingdom of Israel, the lost 10 tribes, that stayed with the southern kingdom, which is Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, all right? So when you read in Gentile, right, it's referring to the Israelites, foreigners. So you had the northern kingdom, they were looked at as Gentiles. Remember it says in John 10:16, Yahushua said that he has sheep that's not of this fold. But also you had the southern kingdom, right, Judah, Benjamin, Levi, that were in a Gentile state of mind from previous captivities, mainly the Greek captivity, the Greek Empire. Because what was the goal of the Greek Empire? To Hellenize the whole known world at that specific time, which they pretty much did, all right? Because all nations back during that time, they had to consent unto the ways of the Greeks, meaning you got to dress like them, you know, talk like them, believe on the same philosophies and keep the same customs as the Greeks. So the Israelites, they were forced into Hellenization. So this is what I'm reading. It says, who lost their Hebrew identity through assimilation. These Israelites living as pagans in Greek culture were Gentiles in status. And that's how the circumcision, which was Jews that was raised up in Judea, keeping the laws to the best of their abilities, right? But they looked at the uncircumcision, the Israelite foreigners, as Gentiles in status. It says not ethnicity, often appearing as Greeks. Like when you go into the root words for particular words, you're gonna see Hellenized or nations, ethnos, right? Key aspects of Hellenized Israelites as Gentiles: lost identity. Hellenized Israelites, particularly from the northern kingdom, were considered not my people, Hosea, right? When you read Hosea, the 1st and 2nd chapter, Hosea had 2 kids, which pretty much spiritually and physically it will represent the nation of Israel's status with the Most High, All right. It says, having become indistinguishable from the nation Gentiles, right? Because they were following the way of the heathen. Some of them even look like heathen on the outward appearance, but your nationality is determined by what? The seed of your father. So ain't no such thing as biracial or being mixed. So it says the Greeks, Hellenized, right? New Testament references to Greek or Grecian often denote Jews or Israelites who adopted Greek culture, language, and customs rather than native ethnic Greeks, right? Meaning what? You may be a Jew by nationality and seed line, but the customs and the philosophies you decide to believe on, it wouldn't be your culture. You would be following the way of the heathen instead of keeping your culture, which is the law, statutes, and commandments. And that's what you had in the New Testament. It says, Acts 15, interpretation. It says, some interpretations suggest the Gentiles or remnant of men in James' speech, Acts 15 and 17, refer specifically to the lost sheep of the house of Israel being gathered from the nations. All right? Let's see. Let me just read this. Let me vet this real quick. Nations, okay, I can read this. Mistranslation. Some scholars argue that English translations frequently render ethnos as Gentiles, pagan outsiders, instead of nations, which could include dispersed Israel. No, not include. It is dispersed Israel only. Because the 17 heathen nations, they can't receive salvation. They can't have the gift of faith. They can't have the Holy Spirit. They can't receive salvation. They can't have part in the seed line of Israel's inheritance, which is the kingdom of heaven or the promised land of Israel. They always going to be literal Gentiles. So you have two type of Gentiles. You have the natural Gentiles, which is the 17 heathen nations, and then you got the Israelite foreigners that were looked at as Gentiles in status. All right. It says hiding the context of recovering scattered Israel. All right. Terminology breakdown in Greek. Hellenistas, right? It says Greek speaking Jews or Israelites, Acts 6 and 1. All right. So you had Greek speaking Jews. That's why you got particular scriptures. It'll say things like what? That there's no difference between the Jew nor the Greek. How come there's no difference? Because it's the same seed line. It's the same nationality. Both is required to have faith upon YAHSHAWAR to be saved. Whether you raised up as a Jew or you an Israelite foreigner outside of the land of Jerusalem. So it says Hellenized, right? Often refers to Hellenized Israelites or those following Greek culture. And I'm going to get into that. The word ethnos, it says nations, Gentiles. No, the word ethnos is referring to a single seed line, a single nationality, which in context, depending on the verse or chapter you're reading, it's referring to the children of Israel. All right? It says, for a deeper analysis, it says it can help me. Now I can help you. It says, examine specific Bible verses where ethne or ethnos likely refers to Israelites. Exactly. Discuss the role of Paul's ministry in reaching Hellenized Israelites. That's who's being called Gentiles in the New Testament. All right? So that's it with that. So this is what else I typed in. Because all this is important to know when you're battling Christians. Now, that's the problem with a lot of Israelites. It's not about being the deepest or, trying to be smarter or know more than somebody. How the fuck are you going to defend the doctrine and the gospel if you don't read chapters, if you don't even know the milk? You got to be able to break stuff down for people, right? So it says, this is what I typed in on Google, Hellenized Israelites during the Roman Empire. Hellenized Israelites or Hellenistic Jews during the Roman Empire were Jewish individuals or Israelite individuals from the 12 tribes of Israel, often of the upper class or diaspora. Which the diaspora, by the way, let me get some information, all right? See, this is why I have these bulletins here for the lessons, for edification. So this is from Wikipedia. The phrase African diaspora gradually entered common usage at the turn of the 21st century. The term diaspora originates from the Greek word diaspora, which means scattering. So that's what the word diaspora means. It means scattering. Like you had multiple different slave trades that took place. You have the main one that everybody knows, right? The transatlantic slave trade, but then you had an Indian Ocean slave trade. You had a Dutch, French, British slave trade, Iberian slave trade. All right, you had multiple different slave trades. It says, which gained popularity in English in reference to the Jewish diaspora. So they literally telling you that all the slave trades that took place was to fulfill what was written in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64, about the scattering of the Israelites. All right, the Israelite diaspora. So they're telling you that the descendants of the people that were sold into slavery are Jews that are being scattered. So it says before being more broadly applied to other populations. I mean, like, come on. So now let's jump back. So once again, it says, I typed in Hellenized Israelites during Roman Empire. Hellenized Israelites are Hellenistic Jews during the Roman Empire, were Israelite individuals, often of the upper class or diaspora, who adopted Greek language, right, culture, customs, and intellectual traditions while maintaining their Israelite faith. I don't like the word Jewish, all right, because we're not Jewish. We know that ISH at the end of the word pertains to trying to be like the original thing. No, we are that by the seed, right? It says centered heavily in Alexandria, because you had a lot of Greek-speaking Jews. You had a community of Israelites in Alexandria during that time, right? And other urban centers, they produced the Septuagint, which was under Ptolemy Philadelphus II, Ptolemy Soda's son, right? And mediated between traditional Israelite law and Hellenistic thought, creating a unique blended culture, all right? Which that's not our culture if you got to blend it with something else. So it says, here are key details regarding Hellenized Israelites under Roman rule. Cultural blend. They spoke Greek, adopted Hellenistic legal practices and business, and often used Greek names. They were distinguished from Aramaic-speaking Hebrews, all right? So these are the Israelites, right, the Israelite foreigners that's being looked at as Gentiles because they're not speaking Hebrew. And by the way, Paleo-Hebrew and Aramaic is totally different. It's two different things, two different languages. But primarily during that time, mainly during the Babylonian captivity, all the way up to the ancient Roman Empire, our people were speaking Aramaic, or that Assyrian Hebrew, all right? It says social and political impact. In Judea, the upper-class pro-Hellenizers often supported Roman/Greek influence, leading to eternal conflict with traditionalist groups like the Pharisees, all right? And this is why the Jews, that was called the circumcision, they look down upon the Israelite foreigners because they're following the way of the heathen. And plus they're law-based. So they looked at the Israelite foreigners as actual Gentile heathen. It says the diaspora influence. Outside Judea, Egypt, Syria, Hellenism was more widely accepted, with Jews merging Hebrew traditions with Greek intellectual values. It says religious adaptation. They utilize Greek philosophical tools to interpret Torah, a movement, it says, exemplified by Philo of Alexandria. Conflict with tradition. In the pre-Roman era, Hellenizing tendencies sparked the Maccabean revolt, but by the Roman period, Hellenism was integrated into everyday life, even by the ruling Hasmoneans, right? Which the Hasmoneans, that was the line of Levi, or the tribe of Levi. Those were Israelites, all right? The Maccabeans, they were Levites. They were priests. It says, who used Greek, Hebrew, and Hellenistic style coinage. All right? So there you go. So that's pretty much it. Let's read this and then get back to the scriptures. So I also typed in apocryphal customs. Israelites hated Greek theories, right? The Israelites that was in their right frame of mind. When you read in the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, they chose to die rather than conform to the way of the Seleucid Empire, right? overview, during the Second Temple period, many Israelites strongly opposed the imposition of Hellenistic culture and Greek theories, viewing them as threats to their religious law, monotheism, and traditions. The Apocryphal, particularly books like 1st to 2nd Maccabees, document this intense conflict, detailing the forced Hellenization and the violent resistance against abandoning Israelite customs. Key aspects of this conflict included forced assimilation, right? Antiochus IV, or Epiphanes, sought to unify his empire by enforcing Greek culture, including the abandonment of dietary laws, circumcision, and Sabbath observation. So under the Seleucid Empire, right, under Antiochus Epiphanes or Antiochus IV, right, he forced Israelites into Hellenism or Hellenistic customs and philosophies. So by the time you get to the ancient Roman Empire, which is, generations after the Greek Empire, they were Hellenized already. They were looked at as Gentiles. They were keeping Gentile customs. It says cultural clashes. The insistence on worshiping one God clashed with the Greek practices of idolatry, polytheism, and the worship of city gods, leading to persecution of those who refuse. Rejection of philosophy. Many Jews saw Greek intellectual and philosophical theories as inherently idolatrous, contrary to the Torah. The Maccabean revolt. Brave leaders like Judas Maccabeus led revolts against his forced Hellenization to protect their religious identity. The Apocrypha, which includes books like 1st to 2nd Maccabees, provide insight into the struggle to maintain Israelite identity in the face of Greek influence. All right, so that's it. That's it. So now, let's read on Romans 10, because you got to understand the Apocrypha, it was originally a part of the Old Testament. Like when you read the table of contents in the King James 1611 version, you're going to notice that the Apocrypha books are in there. Why? Because it was originally a part of the King James version, but it was taken out by a group of Protestant Christians known as the Bible Destruction Group, which is a group of Edomites trying to hide the truth of secular history and who the Israelites actually are. So let's get into some examples that you had Greek-speaking Jews during the time of Rome, right? That were looked at as Gentiles. This is Romans 10 and 12. It says, "For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek." Why? Because it's the same seed line. Both of them is required to have faith upon YAHSHAWAR to be saved. You're not going to be saved by just keeping the law without faith. For the same Lord is over all. Why? Because it's the same seed line. Didn't it say in Matthew 1:21 that he was born to save his people? It says, "Who is rich unto all, whether be Jew nor Greek," meaning Israelites from Judea, raised up knowing that they're Israelites, and also Israelite foreigners. So YAHSHAWAR, he broke down that separation, that middle wall of partition. It says, "Unto all that call upon him." For whosoever, the whosoever is always referring to Israelites. You got to read verses above. You got to understand the context. The purpose of YAHSHAWAR, the purpose of his blood is sacrifice, the purpose of the prophets preaching the gospel, correct doctrine. Who are these men talking to? Who are they spreading the message to? Before you just assume, oh, whosoever, it means everybody. Oh, they got the word all in there. But read the damn chapter so you can understand. So that's it. It says, "For whosoever shall call upon the name, singular, of YAHSHAWAR shall be saved." Yeah, as long as you have faith. All right? Let's read read this. This is Acts 17 and 12. It says, Acts 17 and 12, therefore many of them, Israelites, believed, also of honorable women. Yes, you had honorable women during the ancient Roman Empire and the ancient Greek Empire. Really throughout all our captivity, you had honorable women. It's not the catapult or pedestalized women. You know, I don't Queen of Heaven worship, but you had women that would rather die than to conform to the way of the heathen. Or they did particular things to help their people out. In the case of Judith, right? So you had honorable Israelite women. It says, which were Greeks, and of men, not a few. Let's go into the word Greeks. The word there, I'm going to let it play in the Greek for Greeks.
Strong's G 1674, Hellenes. Hellenes.
All right, Hellenes. Yep. And see, when you read particular definitions, it's meant to throw you off, because the world thinks that what? When you see words like all, whosoever, oh, the scriptures is written in English, it got to be applied to everybody. It's not. Yep. It says a Greek woman, a Gentile woman, not a Jewish, all right? But it is referring to Israelites. That's who it's referring to. She was an Israelite woman that was a Greek-speaking Jew, all right? And they started to believe. So there you go. So that's it with that. Now, let's get this example. Because you got particular people, they'll say, oh, Timothy's father, he was an actual Greek. Like if he was a white man or something, or a so-called white man. But that's not true. Timothy's father was a Jew that would rather follow the way of the Greeks. It's that simple. Acts 16 and 1. This is concerning the Macedonian vision, which after a while, when the Macedonians, you know, because you got Macedonia, the actual place, but within Macedonia, you had Israelites, you had Israelite foreigners. And as Paul was working with these men, you know, teaching them the correct gospel and doctrine, right, their faith started to increase, and then you had churches in Macedonia. Acts 16 and 1. Then came he to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there named Timotheus, or Timothy, right? Which Timothy later on, as his faith increased, he will go on to what? Follow and believe on Yahushua. And then he would spread the correct gospel and doctrine. But it started from somewhere. Who did he learn the truth from? Through Yahushua. He learned it from Apostle Paul. So it says, named Timotheus, the son of a certain woman, which was a Jewish, right? Meaning she was a Israelite woman from the tribe of Judah. She's a female and believed, but his father was a Greek. So you have every type of example in the scriptures. You got examples of men that are Jews or from the 12 tribes of Israel that believe, but then their significant other, their partner, their wife, doesn't believe. That's okay. Then you got an example like this of women from the 12 tribes of Israel that believe, but their husband doesn't believe. So there are examples like that in the scriptures. All right. So it says, but his father was a Greek. So you'll read that in English for face value with no understanding and be like, oh yeah, the Hebrew Israelites, these guys are a racist cult. They're a hate group. You know, they're teaching hate. They're the new KKK. They're the black KKK. But you got to go into the word. It says his father was a Greek. Let's go into it. So the word there for Greek, Strong's G 1672, Helen, right? And check this out. By extension, a Greek-speaking person. That's all he was. He was a Greek-speaking Jew. That's all it is. It says in a wider sense, the name embraces all nations, not Jews, that made the language, customs, and learning of the Greeks their own. That's what Timothy's father was. He was a Greek-speaking Jew. He was an Israelite that didn't want to follow the law, statutes, and commandments or have faith in Yahushua, and he would rather follow the way of the Greeks. You had Israelites that was like that. Even in the wilderness, you had Israelites, they wanted to go back to Egypt. Even during the Greek Empire, you had Israelites that willingly conformed to the way of the Greeks. You always had sellouts, right? It says Greeks that owned the primary reference to a difference of religion and worship. So it don't literally mean he was an actual Greek. He was a Jew that followed the ways of the Greeks. He would rather do that. All right? So that's the point. So now, let's get into this. So I typed in 1 Maccabees chapter 1 AI overview, right? AI overview. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 sets the stage for the Maccabean revolt, detailing the rise of Alexander the Great and subsequent division of his empire among his generals, specifically focusing on the Hellenistic Seleucid oppression under Antiochus Epiphanes. It highlights the forced assimilation of Jews into Greek culture. So Timothy's father was a part of that. All right. Anytime you read in the scriptures about Greeks or Grecians that believe, they were Greek-speaking Jews, going back to this history right here, on how that line, right, or their family became Greek-speaking Jews. It says, the plundering of the Jerusalem temple and the resulting intense religious persecution that prompts a faithful remnant to resist, right? Go down here. It says key themes in 1 Maccabees chapter 1. The rise of Hellenism. Alexander the Great conquers the region, leading to the spread of Greek culture, laws, and customs. Because what was the goal of Alexander the Great and all of his generals? To Hellenize the whole known world at his specific time. When he died, his generals, all of them, even the ones that we don't even mention, that's what they were spreading, all right? They were influencing the world to be like the Greeks by violence, right? It says divided empire and persecution. After Alexander's death, his successors, the Seleucids, create a chaotic and sinful era. It says Antiochus Epiphanes, he invades Egypt, and on his return attacks Jerusalem, desecrating the temple in 169 BCE. It says Hellenization and renegades. Some Israelite factions voluntarily adopt Greek customs. See, everything I'm saying, I already know what I'm saying, but you need to understand what I'm saying, because a lot of times we do these videos and, you know, people is not as advanced as we are. You can have somebody that's new, and it's really their job to seek Yahweh and Yahawashi by asking you questions on the comment board. Because a lot of these videos and content we put out through the Spirit, we already did it over like 100 damn times already. All right? But part of being a prophet is that you got to keep on repeating yourself. It says Hellenization and renegades. Some Israelite factions voluntarily adopt Greek customs, build a gymnasium, and abandon the Torah. The abomination of desolation, right? Because that happened during the Greek Empire, and it happened in 70 AD. The abomination of desolation in 167 BCE, Antiochus bans Israelite law, forbids sacrifice, and burns scriptures, and erects an altar to Zeus, forcing compliance under penalty of death. So this is how the Israelites became known when you get to the Roman Empire as Greek-speaking Jews, because they were forced by violence into Hellenization. It says, faithful resistance. Despite severe persecution and massacres, many Jews chose to die rather than break the covenant. And that's what I would do. All right? Now, I'm just going to jump around. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. Gonna hit little key points. All right. Now this is 1 Maccabees 1:1. It says, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Shittim, right, or Chetam, has smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes. Because going back to Daniel, the 2nd and the 7th chapter, right, you have particular heathen nations, because we in the time of the Gentiles, So you had particular heathen nations that were set to rule according to that dream or vision that Nebuchadnezzar had. All right. So first it was the Neo-Babylonian Empire, right? Then you had the Medo-Persian Empire, then the Greek Empire, then the Roman Empire, and then it was prophesied that what? Rome will come back into power again, but in a future generation, which is right now. That's why you have America, you have the European Union, right? You have something called the Treaty of Rome, letting you know what? That Rome, or the nation that was ruling during the Roman Empire, is in rulership again, which is who? The Edomites, the so-called white man in Ceylon, has smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, because that was a joint empire between the Persians and the Medes, right? The Persians being Elam, right, the descendants of Elam, and the Medes being descendants of Japhet. So they had a joint empire. It says that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece, and made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth, because it was time for the Greeks to be in power now at that time, right? And went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, and so much that the earth was quiet before him, meaning no nation could stop him concerning war, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. He was prideful. And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die, referring to Alexander the Great. Wherefore he called his servants, right? His servants being what? All these different generals we know. It says, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So his generals were going to what? Force nations into Hellenization, Hellenism. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule, every one in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves, meaning what? They ruled particular areas in the earth at their time, right? It says, so did their sons after them many years. Because you'll notice, like, the sons, they got the same name as the father, but then, you know, they're number 2 or number 3, or for an example, like Ptolemy Philadelphus II, right? Then you had Ptolemy Soter, or Ptolemy the First. It says, after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. Going back to what? Malachi 1:4. It says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, because he got that nickname from the Israelites, right? Son of Antiochus the king, who had been in hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks, right? 137 BCE. It says, in those days were there out Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, right? Persuaded other Israelites into what? Hellenism, Hellenization. This is why by the time you get to the Roman Empire, the first beast, they were being called Greeks or Gentiles, right? They were looked at as pagans. It says, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we've had much sorrow. See, so you had Israelites that were persuaded into what? Hellenization, Hellenism. So this device pleased them well, because they didn't have faith upon Yahweh. They didn't have honor. So what did they do? They sold out. It says, then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances. Ordinances meaning the laws, the ways of the Greeks, of the heathen. Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem, according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. All right? So there you go. So I'm going to skip over that, because we dealing with Hellenization, but I just want to get to the points. First Maccabees chapter 1, verse, let's see. Okay. start up. Okay. First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 37. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary and defiled it. That's what the Greeks under Antiochus Epiphanes, that's what they did. They killed our people, with no mercy, for no reason. And so much that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, whereupon the city was made an habitation of strangers, meaning heathen, and became strange to those that were born in her, meaning the Israelites that were the natives, obviously, because that's our inheritance. The city became strange because it was given unto the heathen. The heathen, they can't keep the law, statutes, and commandments. Proof of that is what? 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, from like verses 20 on down. All right? Anytime the heathen nations is in our inheritance, meaning the promised land of Israel, what do? They worship idols. They commit fornication. They do things naturally against the law, statutes, and commandments. The heathen nation, they can't keep the laws at all. So it says, it became strange to those that were born in her, and her own children left her. Her sanctuary, referring to the promised land of Israel, her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. As had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned into mourning. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all, meaning all nations, the Israelites included, but all nations should be one people. So this is like their version of a new world order. All right, what was their version of the new world order? To Hellenize the whole world, which the Israelites got caught up in it. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. This applies to Israelites as well. Leave the law, statutes, and commandments, forsaking your God, and follow the way of the Greeks. This was originally Alexander the Great's goal, which he succeeded in that goal, and his legacy kept going through his generals. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. They didn't have a choice, or they was going to die. Yeah, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. All right? This is why when you read 1 Corinthians 12 and 2, ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led. This is how they became known as Gentiles. All right? So we couldn't keep our laws. So now, let's get into this. So I typed in on Google 2 Maccabees 6 Overview Bible, right? AL Overview. 2 Maccabees 6 details the intensification of persecution against Jews under King Antiochus Epiphanes, focusing on the forced Hellenization of Judea, the defilement of the temple. That's what the abomination of desolation is, when they were sacrificing pig, on the altar as a sacrifice. It says, and the heroic martyrdom of Eleazar, a scribe who chooses death over violating Yahweh's laws. This chapter highlights a shift from passive resistance to the theological significance of martyrdom and faithfulness. Key aspects of 2 Maccabees 6. Forced Hellenization. Antiochus orders the defilement of the Jerusalem temple, right? The second temple, aka the abomination of desolation, renaming it for Zeus Olympios, banning the Sabbath and prohibiting the public confession of Judaism, or the law, statutes, and commandments, the laws of Yahweh, right? Atrocity. Jews are forced to eat swine flesh, participate in Dionysian processions, which Dionysian, that's one of them gods they worship. I think that was the goddess of like fertility, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I don't really give a fuck about it, because that's the way of the Greeks. I don't care about that. But this is good to know, because this is the pagan customs that they were keeping. It says, and are killed for circumcision, leading to the martyrdom of mothers and their children. It says the martyrdom of Eleazar. Eleazar, a prominent elderly scribe, refuses to pretend to eat forbidden meat, choosing a glorious death over life, setting a standard of noble commitment to the law. It says, yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we could get into it. Let's see. I'm trying to see, should I read this whole chapter or? Because I mean, y'all pretty much got the gist of it. I just want to show you the key things on how they were forced. 2 Maccabees 6 and okay, 2 Maccabees 6 and 5. The altar also was filled with profane things. Matter of fact, okay, 2 Maccabees 6 and 1. Not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers, and not to live after the laws of Yahweh, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, and that in Garizim of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place. The coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles, who delighted with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places. So these niggas, they just fucking beasts, having sex all over the place, you know, defiling our temple, having sex in the temple, and besides that, brought in things that were not lawful. The altar was filled with profane things, which the Lord forbiddeth. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient fasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. It says, and in the day of king's birth, every month they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices, and when the fast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus carrying envy. It says, moreover, they went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by the suggestion of Ptolemy, right? Ptolemy Soter the first, and this is where you get so-called white Egyptians from, like Cleopatra. They were Greeks that took over Egypt under Ptolemy. It says against the Jews that they should observe the same fashion. See, all of Alexander General's job was to Hellenize the whole known world. They kept Alexander the Great legacy going, right? Same fashions, and be partakers of their sacrifices. Because remember, you had Israelites, they were in Egypt, Alexandria, different parts, right? So even they were forced into this. It says, and whoso would not conform themselves to the manners of the Gentiles should be put to death. Then might a man have seen the present misery. All right? Yeah, I don't read that. That's going to get me riled up. But pretty much you have righteous women that made their children get circumcised and keep the law. They didn't conform to the Greeks. All right? So you need to know when you read the New Testament, the Israelites that's being grafted in is descendants of who? The Greek-speaking Jews, the foreigners from previous captivities. It ain't talking about actual heathen. This is Romans 11 and, let's see, Romans 11 and 13. For I speak to you Gentiles, right? Let me actually go into that word. Romans, matter of fact, I gotta start up. Romans 11:11. I say then, have they stumbled that they shall fall? The Most High forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles, because the Israelites that were raised in Judea, that knew that they were Jews, that was keeping the law, statutes, and commandments, they still fell. Why? Because they're in the flesh. All right? So if you in a human body, which that's what the flesh is, you can't keep the law, statutes, or commandments perfectly. You're a sinner called back to repentance through the blood and sacrifice of Yahushua. So you had Jews that will put the law over Yahushua. They will put the law over faith, and that couldn't save them. So it says, I say, then have they stumbled that they should fall? Yahweh forbid. But rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles. The Gentiles being who? Israelite foreigners, going back to the word ethnos. All right? A multitude of individuals of the same nature or genus, the human family, a tribe, nation, people, group. There you go. It's referring to Israelites. Matter of fact, let's see. Okay, that's the point. Continuing on, it says, for to provoke them to jealousy. Now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more the fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, right? Going back to the word ethnos, he's referring to Israelites. Inasmuch as I am the apostles of the Gentiles, going back to Galatians, the 2nd chapter, I magnify my office. What was Paul's office? When you read Galatians, the 2nd chapter, to preach the gospel of repentance to the Israelite foreigners. All right? If by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, meaning other Israelites, and might save some of them. It says, yep. Matter of fact, let's just get to the point. Okay. Let's see, verse 17, it says, and if some of the branches be broken off, referring to the Israelite foreigners that's being called Gentiles, right? And thou being a wild olive tree, going back to the book of Jeremiah, it calls Israel a wild olive tree, right? And I already did a video on Romans 11, you go watch it. It says, well, grafted in among them. How would they be grafted in? Because they was there in the first place. It says, and with them partakers of the root and fatness of the olive tree, because they're Israelites. Only Israelites can take part in the Israelite inheritance. It says, boast not against the branches, because you had the circumcision, which were Jews. They boasted against the uncircumcision, which is the Israelite foreigners. They thought that the law made them more righteous, and it didn't. It says, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. It says, thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Because salvation is for who? It's for the seed line of Israel. It says, well, because of unbelief, they were broken off. I just went over the history. And thou standest by faith. That's what pleased the Most High, faith. The Most High don't judge like how other men judge on the outward appearance. Oh, he's short, he wear glasses. Oh, look at his head. Oh, look how he talk. This, that, this, and that. That's how regular, normal men on earth think. It says, be not high-minded, but fear. For if the Most High spared not the natural branches, which is Israelites, right, Jews from Judea, keeping the laws, take heed, lest he also spared not thee. Behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of the Most High on them which feel servanty, but towards thee goodness, if thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou shalt also be cut off. It says, and they also, if they abide, not still in their unbelief, right? That's why Paul said what? That you were Gentiles, carried away by these dumb idols. Going back to the Hellenization, shall be grafted in. So if you repent from that, you could be grafted in, meaning you could be saved. For the Most High is able to graft them in again. Why would he be able to graft them in again? Because they was there in the first place. They're the wild olive tree. It's just that some of the branches was broken off because of our disobedience, being scattered, all right, being forced into Hellenization. So as long as they have faith upon Yahushua and repent from them Gentile pagan ways, they could be grafted in again through Yahushua. For if thou were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, right? All this is recorded in Jeremiah. It calls Israel a wild olive tree, right? It says, how much more shall these which be the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? Now, who is Paul talking to? Right? The grafting in and all this. Is he talking about actual Gentiles? No. Here's the proof. For I would not, brethren. They go to the word brethren again. So when you read in Romans the 11th chapter, he's talking to his brethren. Going back to the Greek word, let it play.
Strong's G80, Adelphos. Adelphos.
Adelphos, right? Who is Paul addressing in Romans 11? For you people that say, oh, the Gentiles can be grafted in, shut up. It says, having the same national ancestor. What's the national ancestor? The fathers of the promise, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, belonging to the same people or countrymen. That's why when you read Romans 11 and like verses 1 and 2, Paul says, what? I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. He's talking to his people. So that's the point. So it says, for I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery. The mystery of what? The Israelite foreigners being grafted back in. That was already there in the first place. Because it's about the seed line that repent and have faith upon Yahushua, the ones that's predestinated unto salvation. It don't matter how you look, how tall you are, how buff. Who cares? It says, of this mystery least ye should be wise in your own conceits. That blindness in part is happened to Israel, because that's what was prophesied. Jeremiah 17:4. Scriptures talk about great falling away first, until the fullness of the Gentiles become in. Let me read that in the NLT version. This is Romans 11:25. I want you to understand this mystery, dear brothers and sisters. Paul is talking to Israelites, so that you would not feel proud about yourselves. Some of the people of Israel have hard hearts, but this will last only until the full number of Gentiles comes to Hamashiach Yahushua, meaning the ones that's going to repent, like how you read about in Acts the 2nd chapter. And so all Israel shall be saved. It don't say nothing about no 17 heathen nations receiving salvation and being saved. It says, and so all Israel shall be saved. Just because you read a word in English, that don't mean that's what the scriptures is talking about in context. The Gentiles that could come in or be grafted in is Israelites from the seed line of Israel. And so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, which is Yahushua, and shall turn ungodliness from Jacob. And that's through the new covenant. All right, and Paul talks about the new covenant. I'm gonna just finish it off with this now. Ephesians 2:11. Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh. That's a key thing. You're not a Gentile by seed line or nationality or identity. It's talking about in the flesh, the customs and the philosophies you was believing in on, the way you was carrying yourself like a Gentile, right? Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh. Who is Paul talking to? First of all right? He's talking to the Israelites that's in Ephesus, because that's why it's called Ephesians. So it says, who are called uncircumcision, right? They were literally uncircumcised, going back to what I read in 1 Maccabees, the 1st chapter. It says, by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands. That's reading the NLT version, Ephesians 2:11. It says, don't forget that you Gentiles, referring to the Israelite foreigners that were grafted back in because they had faith upon Yahushua and received the gospel, used to be called outsiders. The word Gentile, going back to the Latin word gentilis, which means foreigner, they were looked at as outsiders because they was living outside of Jerusalem. You were called uncircumcised heathens. They were looked at as heathen. Ain't another synonym or word for Gentile heathen? Because they're outside of the temple. They was outside of Jerusalem. So they were looked at as uncircumcised heathens by the Jews who were proud of their circumcision, even though it affected only their bodies and not their hearts. That's why Paul said in Romans 11, boast not against the branches, because they were prideful and they couldn't even be saved by the keeping of the law. In those days, you were living apart from Hamashiach. You were excluded from the citizenship among the people of Israel, and you did not know the covenant of promises Yahweh had made to them. You lived in this world without Yahweh and without hope. All right. KJV verse 12, that at that time you were without Hamashiach, being aliens, because you were foreigners from the commonwealth of Israel, and the strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without the Most High in the world. But now in Hamashiach Yahushua, ye who sometimes were far off or made nigh by the blood of Hamashiach, because now they could be grafted back in because they have faith upon Yahushua. This is why Yahushua, who the world ignorantly called Jesus Christ, ate with sinners, because it represented what? That through his blood and sacrifice they can receive and have faith upon Yahushua. All right? It says, oh yeah, here we go. Verse 14. This is one of my favorite chapters, by the way. Ephesians 2:14. For he is our peace, Yahushua, right? He's our mediator, he's our high priest, he's our savior, who have made both one, right? That's why the scriptures say, oh, there's no difference between the Jew nor Greek, because it's the same seed line. It's the same nation being addressed. And have broken down the middle wall of partition between us, right? Between the circumcision and uncircumcision, because both is required to have faith upon Yahushua. The Greek word for partition is phragmos, right? And it says what? A fence, a barrier, right? That's separation. Oh, I keep the law, I'm better than you. Oh, you guys is looked at as heathen. Yep, it says that which separates, prevents two from coming together. So that's why the scriptures say there's no difference between the Jew nor the Greek, because now they're the same, all are one, because they have faith in Yahushua and believe on the same gospel and doctrine, which will make them wise unto salvation through their faith in Yahushua. Again, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments containing ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one, new man, so making peace. I'm going to finish it off in the NLT. Ephesians 2:15. This is what Yahushua did through his blood and sacrifice. He did this by ending the system of the law with its commandments and regulations. He made peace between Jews and Gentiles by creating in himself one new people from the two groups. Together as one body, Hamashiach reconciled both groups to Yahweh by means of his death on the cross, and our hostility toward each other was put to death. He brought this good news, aka the gospel of peace, to you Gentiles who were far away from him, and peace to the Jews who were near. Now all of us can come to Yahweh through the same Holy Spirit because of what Hamashiach Yahushua has done for us. All right? So it says, so now you Gentiles are no longer strangers and foreigners. You are citizens along with all of Yahweh's holy people. You are members of Yahweh's family, because they were Israelites to begin with. All right? So that's pretty much it. You know, Lord willing, you was edified by the lesson. Shalom.